Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the session on Welsh Jewish heritage. My name's Kai Parry-Jones, and I'll be chairing this morning's session. So over the next hour, we'll hear from two different projects from North Wales and South Wales. And the first speaker will speak for 15 minutes, the second speaker will speak for half an hour, and then we'll have Q&A and discussion for roughly 10 to 15 minutes afterwards. If you can remain on mute throughout the session, that would be great. And if you have any questions, or if the speakers spark any questions that you'd like to ask at the end, please feel free to put those in the chat function in this session. So our first speaker is Professor David Cohen, who is a trustee of the Jewish History Association of South Wales, and he will be speaking about preserving the history of Jewish South Wales. And Professor Cohen is an emeritus professor of health economics at the University of South Wales, and he is Canadian and has been living in South Wales since 1985. And he's been a trustee of the Jewish History Association of South Wales since 2019. And our second speaker, who will be presenting on the topic of walking Welsh Jewish history, is Professor Nathan Abrams of Bangor University. And he has been in Wales and researching Welsh Jewish history since he moved to Bangor in 2006. So now the introductions have been made, I will hand over to our first speaker, David Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Can I assume everyone can see me as well as hear me? Because I only have on my screen my slides filling the screen.
Yes,
am I okay
we can
to
see
go?
you and hear you.
Okay. David Cohen, trustee, Jewish History of South Wales. South Wales has a significant, if largely recent, Jewish history. It does go back quite a long way, however. The first Jewish community was as far back as 1730 in Swansea. And if you consider that there were no Jews at all in Britain from the expulsion by Edward I in 1290 through to the Commonwealth, when Cromwell invited Jews back in 1655, it wasn't long after the return of the Jews, who of course started in London, that we got the first community in Wales in Swansea, attracted as common by economic opportunity. Swansea was a boom town, mainly due to copper. It actually was nicknamed Copperopolis. And the community there was significant. It is still there to a very, very small degree. Cardiff, founded around 1841. These dates are all approximate. My list here is by no means complete, and I should apologize for not having Newport on the list, because Newport, founded 1871, was a significant community, and there still are about half a dozen Jews in Newport. All of the
Sorry, David, sorry to interrupt you. We can't see your slides. Please, could you just make sure that they're on share?
I'm so sorry.
Sorry to have interrupted.
No. It's important that you see my slides. I'm clicking on share screen. And what comes up isn't my screen. Oh dear. Bear with me. Can I get some technical help from your end?
Marvelous.
That's it. Okay, this is what I was talking to. 1730 Swansea, then Cardiff. As you can see, the rest of them, mainly the end of the 19th century, in what we call, all of these towns are in what we call the South Wales valleys. They were booming in the late 19th century, largely due to steel and coal, and again, economic opportunity attracted a lot of Jews. These were significant Jewish communities. They weren't just, one or two families, but they were communities as such, which made major contributions to the local community and the local economy. There were synagogues where the community was big enough to have one. From the tiny And this is an example of Aberdare, which was just a house that became a dedicated synagogue. On the right, in color, you can see that it is now no more than just a house again, but thanks to the blue plaque, you can in fact find out that it was once the synagogue. But if you look at the old photograph and your eyes are very good, you could just about make out the Star of David, the Magen David, and some Jewish writing over the door. Larger communities, of course, had more money, could build larger and dedicated synagogues. The biggest, I believe there ever was this one in Cardiff called the Cathedral Road Synagogue. If you go to Cathedral Road in Cardiff, it's still there, or at least it looks like it's still there, because the front, the facade, was listed. And so when a company bought the building to turn it into an office building, they had to retain the facade. Sadly, all the rest of the building has been demolished and replaced with an office block. There still are two synagogues in Cardiff, one Orthodox and one Reform. And I put here even Gothic. I'm not at all sure that this is Gothic, but it looks Gothic to me, so I'll call it Gothic. It's in Merthyr Tydfil, which had a very large Jewish community. There's a Jewish cemetery just outside Merthyr called Kevin Coita Cummer. And if you go there and you look at the number of graves, it's evident that we were dealing once with a large community, which sadly, as with all the other communities I showed you on the slide, apart from Cardiff, is no more. The population has declined significantly from a peak of about 5,000 to 7,000 to today a low of about 500 to 700. These numbers are estimates, and Kai may want to give you a more accurate figure, but I think one thing that's pretty much accepted today is that the number has fallen to about a tenth of what it was in its peak. And if I could show you the example of Merthyr Tydfil, 1919, 400 Jews dropping to 175 at the start of the Second World War, 40 in 1959. And at the bottom is a quote from the Daily Telegraph, an article in 1999 that said, George Black, the last Jew in Merthyr, dies age 82. Now, there's some dispute over whether or not he was in fact the last Jew in Merthyr. I have no doubt if you go there now, you'll find the odd student who's renting digs there and the like, but basically the Jewish community of Merthyr is now gone. And so we have a situation where we had thriving communities with lots of heritage and culture and contribution to the wider communities, which in most of South Wales have in fact disappeared completely or have shrunk very much as we see in Cardiff. In 2019, and as a result of that, in 2017, and as a result of that, we created the Jewish History Association of South Wales with three principal aims. Firstly, to preserve the tangible and intangible cultural heritage of the South Wales Jewish communities, tangible being documents and artifacts, and intangible being people's stories. To make these materials available, because I think most people agree that it's one thing to preserve, it's another thing to put things, bury them in the basement of some museum somewhere, as opposed to making them available. And we felt that making them available was very important. And the third was to promote and raise awareness of the Jewish heritage, because it's already been largely forgotten. I gave a talk not long ago in Pontypridd on the Jews of Pontypridd to a church group. My audience was made up of entirely of ladies, average age, I'd say at about 85. And as I would show photographs of things like Cohen the optician and Schwartz the haberdasher and so on, these old ladies were all going, oh yes, I remember him, and I used to get my glasses from him, and my auntie used to work at the reception desk and so, and I used to go to so-and-so's house on a Saturday morning to light their coal fires. And they had so many memories of the Jewish community of Pontypridd. I'm sure if you go to Pontypridd today and you meet anyone much under the age of 85, they wouldn't even be aware that there was a Jewish community there. So we felt that promoting and raising awareness of this Jewish heritage was, in fact, an important objective. We were very fortunate in that we got a significant amount of funding from the National Lottery, the Heritage Fund, HLF Heritage Lottery Fund, I call it. Our first project collected 72 oral histories between January 2018 and September 2019, and the recordings themselves and transcripts of the recordings have been deposited with the National Screen and Sound Archive at the National Library of Wales. And the oral histories are fascinating because hearing, it puts so much color on what you can look at. I showed you the Aberdare Synagogue, and it's a building, and that's very nice. But I'd like to read you, if I may, a testimonial that we got from a man called Cecil Bloom. This was actually a written testimony. He wasn't available for interview. And he said, in Aberdare, the shul was a house near the center of town. The minister lived downstairs. The shul was upstairs. The front upper room was for men, had about 20 seats. The second room was for the ladies, also used as a cheder, a religion school, had an opening. The house had a small yard. He used to bring chickens. I won't read the whole thing, but it puts color on the photograph and on the documents. And just hearing the stories, the recordings, hearing the people's own voices, it's a wonderful way to preserve heritage. We also collected and deposited over 3,000 historical records, documents and images with local archives. And this is an example of the state of some of the documents and items that we found. Clearly, these things without preservation would soon be gone. And quite frankly, without the Jewish History Association, they would be thrown out probably before they were even preserved, because nobody really knew what they were. When we contacted the Newport Synagogue and said we were after their documents, the caretaker said, oh, that's really interesting, because I just put a huge amount of documents in bin bags and put them out for refuse collection. We said, no, go get them back. But by the time he went out, they were gone. And those are lost for all time. Not to despair, though, there were still lots that hadn't been thrown out yet, and our timing was just in time, so at least we saved those. It's interesting, but if the History Association had started 10 years earlier, there's so much more that we could have preserved and so many more memories that we could have collected. And if this project had been done 10 years later, we probably would have lost everything. So there are good things and bad things about our timing. The other thing was the creation of a digital archive to make things more accessible. The things that we collected are on display if you want to go see them, but it's a hell of a lot easier to go onto the People's Collection Wales website, where we've deposited over 3,000 files. I've got a slide at the end that gives details, and it's well worth a visit to the People's Collection Wales website if you're interested in Welsh culture and history, Jewish or otherwise. We also had, as part of funding for Project One, an exhibition, a traveling exhibition that went all over the place, including the Senedd, which is the seat of the Welsh government, the Museum of Welsh Life in St. Fagans, and a lot of local libraries and museums. You could see most of our 19 boards in the top right photograph. They covered a range of topics from occupation, sports, change, arts, youth, ethnicity. We didn't have a separate one on anti-Semitism, but there are a few stories, sad stories of anti-Semitism in some of the boards, particularly the vandalism of the Newport cemetery and the vandalism and desecration of the Swansea synagogue, where the Torah scrolls were actually burnt. Very sad. There is anti-Semitism across the whole world, of course, but the Jewish communities in South Wales, by and large, have a very, very good and positive history of getting along with their neighbors. Anti-Semitism has not been a major problem here by any means. We then got funding again from the Heritage Lottery for a second project. Cardiff Reformed Synagogue was founded in 1948, and at that time, most of the founding members had close relatives who had perished in the Holocaust. And they created a Holocaust Memorial Board, which is still up, should you visit Cardiff Reformed Synagogue, with 102 names on it. And all it's got is name and place where they lived. And of course, back at that time, the founding members could have told you the stories and the life histories about all of these people and who they were and what they did and how they died. But we realized by about 2 or 3 years ago that there was virtually nobody left in the synagogue who knew any of these names. They meant nothing to anyone, and they would be lost with time other than as names on a board. So part of the funding from the lottery for Project 2 was to actually research these names and what we could find out about them. We have a large number of volunteers who work for the, who work with, I shouldn't say for, they're unpaid, the History Association, and they've done a fantastic job on researching these people. And we now have at least something, in many cases, including photographs and histories and details of how they perished, thanks to these volunteers on all 102 of them. We created a Jewish heritage trail, which isn't quite online yet, but it's similar to the one that I believe you're going to hear about from Nathan Abrams in Bangor when I'm finished, so I'll say no more. We identified a lot of items that various museums, particularly in around the kind of half borough, had. They didn't know what they were. We found they'd say things like, oh, look, what's this? We've had this in some box in the back, and it was in fact a tefillin bag, or a Megillah, a scroll of Esther that's read on Purim, and they just had no idea. So we're helping them to catalog that. And we feel, because we've been so successful, if you don't mind me saying so, that we're creating a heritage preservation toolkit that other communities can use to preserve their heritage. Our future plans, I won't say much, I'm a bit over time. They are just basically more of the same. I'd like to end by thanking our funders, the biggest by far being the National Lottery Heritage Fund, but we also got significant funding from Welsh Government, Cardiff University, the Jewish Historical Society for England, and the Jewish Memorial Council. My last slide, Diolch yn fawr iawn. If you're not Welsh, that means thank you very much. And the main thing I would point you to is the second line, which is the Jewish History Association of South Wales, JAHSW website, where you can get details of Twitter and the People's Collection Wales and so on. And I also, I should have done this earlier, I apologize, want to thank our project manager, Claudia Erzen, and her colleague, Rob Jones, who both work for the Jewish History Association. All of the others are volunteers. And Claudia has been responsible for all of our success, including the creation of the History Association in the first place. So many thanks to Claudia, and thank you all for listening.
Diolch yn fawr, David, thank you. We'll now move on to our next speaker, which is Nathan Abrams, who will be speaking about walking Welsh Jewish history.
Bore da, diolch Kai, bore da pawb. Good morning, thank you Kai. Yes, I'll just share my screen now. That working?
Yeah.
Yep, excellent. That's not. Right, so thank you. That's a good introduction, David. Really, I want to ask him a bunch of questions about the funders at the end, rather than talk about. I think that would be a useful session for someone to organise, is how we can get money for this sort of thing, particularly when you don't have a group of trustees to work with on heritage lottery funding applications. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what what I've been doing up here in North Wales, and I just have to have one little caveat at the title of the session. This Jew isn't in a valley. This Jew's more like on a mountain, given the mountainous region of North Wales as opposed to the valleys of South Wales. But hey ho, we can talk about that in the discussion. Right, so I'll just talk a little bit about what we've been doing up here. Based on this handsome chap's work, you might recognize him, He did a PhD under my supervision, published as a book. Sorry that the slides cut off there, Kai. I tried to get the full picture. Anyway, these are the Jews of Wales, a history, and you can find out much more detail, historical detail about what I've been talking about, David's been talking about in this book. But not everyone's going to read an academic book, unfortunately. In fact, my experience is that whilst Jewish people might like to call while we might like to call ourselves the people of the book, we're terrible at buying them. So, and not least because academic books are unreasonably priced because of the small audiences. So with that in mind, what we set about doing up here was translating Kai's excellent work into something that's more kind of populist and more easily digestible for a wider audience than an academic book usually sustains. And this is some of the history, just sort of briefly to cover, that Kai covered and that we cover in our histories so far of North Wales. Jews arrived initially in northwest Wales, according to Cecil Roth's book, from which this map is taken, in the 11th century. And as you can see, these points of Jewish settlement, which probably indicate an individual or families, but not communities or congregations, that we see down here. It's denoted by the different colored dots. But you can see that, you know, in medieval England, that really Jewish settlements confined by and large to the southeast and the eastern half of the country, and then Jews in northwest Wales. And the interesting thing is each of these points of settlements pretty much equate to a castle that Edward I was building his iron ring of castles around the princes of Gwynedd, who are holed up here in what is the Snowdonia National Park today. And therefore we can make the assumption that Jews were involved not in building the castles as such, I won't delve into stereotypes, but more into financing the castles, and were acting as middlemen for the king in the construction of these castles, and were then subsequently expelled when they no longer ceased to be useful. When the ban on Christian usury was lifted, Jews as money lenders became less useful, and it was also convenient to expel Jews because it appeased local anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish feeling. And on top of that, once you've expelled people, as they were all from England in 1290, you can expropriate their property that they can't take with them. So from a king's point of view, it's a win-win-win. Anyway, so here are some of the castles, just some illustrations of the castles. Conwy and Beaumaris, Harlech and Caernarfon here. So as David pointed out, we then don't see any Jews in certainly, I mean, there are reports of the occasional Jew, that's another talk entirely, between 1290 and the early modern period. But we don't see any Jews in North Wales. The focus of my talk quickly till about the 1840s, when German Jews begin to come in. There's upheavals in Germany in the 1840s, so that leads to some immigration into Britain. And here are the dates of the communities in North Wales. So I've put the Welsh there, apart from Wrexham. For some reason, I've put the English for Wrexham, Welsh for Bangor, Welsh for Hill, and Cohen Bay, if you can't work that one out. By Cohen, you've learned some Welsh this morning. So here's some nice images of those communities. And this is what we're hoping to cover actually in our maps. Is we've done Bangor and Llandudno. We're working on Anglesey at the moment, and we need more funding to go east. So these communities are all further east by Colwyn Hill and Wrexham. I mean, the stories of why Jews came up here are, you can see here the communities on the coast are the same as pretty much everywhere else. They came as peddlers. I'll rush through this, give us more time for questions. They came as peddlers from Liverpool, places like Liverpool mainly. If you think Jews come in on the east of England and they transmigrate across, either to leave via ports like Liverpool, or to move to other points in Britain because there's too much competition, say in Hull, where people from Latvia would have arrived from Latvia, would have come across to Liverpool. And if they want to leave the UK for the United States, because that's where they want to go, then they would still leave from Liverpool. So a lot of people who end up in Northwest Wales start there, peddling across, return for Shabbat. That gets tiresome, so they eventually set up here. So a very story and brief. By the way, there's a lot of myths that people like entered into the UK on the west coast of the UK. I mean, you hear this more in Scotland, say Port Glasgow. But if you think about it, there's no way a boat captain is going to sail his boat, or her boat, but most likely his boat, all the way around the top of the UK just so someone can come in on the west coast of the UK. Potentially Cardiff, but I doubt they would have gone all the way around the bottom just to drop someone off here when there's a perfectly good train. They can drop them off in London or points east. So basically, well, people end up on the west coast of Britain because they're transmigrating from the east. And they set up businesses like these, very famous, Wartski's. It's a nice little video of a diamond factory during World War II visited by Wartski the mayor. But there's two businesses set up, one for clothes, one for jewellery in Bangor. He also owned a hotel, so this plot gets called Wartski's Square. There's Polakos is the other big store in Bangor, but also in Northwest Wales. So they had shops in Holyhead, Bangor, Pwllheli. Here you can see the adverts. And these are nice sort of things that we've been collecting. Unlike the project in South Wales, there's almost nothing left in terms of artifacts. If there were stuff from the synagogues, they ended up in those bin bags that David described. And this is one of the unfortunate things. If any of you have anything, no matter how seemingly inconsequential to you, who knows what it might tell us. And that about history, that could be receipts, that could be shopping bags, that could be synagogue minutes. So, you know, what we do in this project is collect, trawl newspapers and the internet and find any images that we can to illustrate our work of this kind of lost, intangible history. This is a rare artifact that we do have because the Polakov family donated all their stuff to Manchester Jewish Museum, who then gave it back to Gwynedd, who keep it all in storage. And I've been arguing with them for a dozen years to try and get it out so we can look at it. This is the main issue. But anyway, here's, I think this is Isidore Polakov's Russian passport that's on display, permanent display in the museum. Part of the agitation, result of the agitation, my agitation and working with the museum to get them to show this stuff. Another thing that drew people to Bangor in particular, so in Bangor people came for commercial opportunities, or just Northwest Wales, peddling. It's a familiar story. For time purpose, I'll rush through it, but another reason that Jews came to Northwest Wales is the university, and that's attracted Jewish staff and students like David Crystal, and the names are escaping me. There's a computer science and a chemist who went off to the Weizmann Institute. I have to remember their names. This chap I won't talk about. He's no one. Anyway, and staff and students have come and gone from the university. I mean, that's the reason I'm there, and that's the reason why other Jewish people are there. And we do have a smattering of students every year, probably enough to form a liberal minyan, but that's about it. Synagogues were set up. So they began above Morris Wartski's shop at 21 High Street. They moved to this building, the Arvonia buildings. They didn't move into the whole building. They shared the premises. Here's a colorized picture of it recently. You can see the state of disrepair. This was torn down, and the thing they replaced it with is still uglier. The concrete building is still uglier than this building in a state of disrepair. You almost wish they'd left these things up. Anyway, when the community dwindled, so expanded, they moved into this one. When it dwindled, they moved into a porch in here. And what you have, and what the Gwynedd Museum has, is a sort of portable, I'd like to call it a mishkan, like a sort of portable synagogue. It's small. It can fit into a front room. Everything in miniature. It's quite interesting, actually. I mean, it's unremarkable architecture for anyone who's been in a synagogue, but what's remarkable is just the sheer sort of size for it. Llandudno, the other one I'll just talk about quickly, attracted people, and still does, because it's a seaside resort, and a very attractive seaside resort at that. Here are adverts from the JC for the kosher guest houses. An interesting project someone should do is whether places like Llandudno, Bournemouth functioned as a kind of Jewish Catskills, and how many Jewish shidduchim were made as a result of places like Llandudno, where Jewish couples maybe were introduced to each other on holiday. I know my parents met, I think, initially in Bournemouth before being reintroduced later in life. And here's Llandudno today. We have the Chabad. I don't think this actually is Chabad, but who knows? I'm not an expert at decoding the different dress of the Haredim, but we also have the Vishnitz. I know these are Vishnitz because I took this from their website, so I guarantee that they're Vishnitz, but someone with sharper eyes than me could tell me who they are. But anyway, a lot of Haredim come through to Llandudno, mainly because a synagogue survives. It's the only one that survives in North Wales, and it's owned by Chabad, but the synagogue started here in the Masonic Hall, and then moved to a second building during World War II in a church when the community grew because of evacuations, wartime evacuations, and then moved to this building on Church Walks in 1948, where it stands today. And you can see it's a converted house. And here's some nice architecturally rendered drawings of the building. This has taken a bit of license. This one's fairly accurate. Here it is today. Is the other angle. Just some pictures of Jewish life in Llandudno. Big wedding of Emanuel Snowman to Harriet Wartsky. And these are some examples of the stores and the kinds of things that we include. So this is the kind of material that we're including in our app. Wartsky has moved from Bangor. The jewelers established 2 premises, well, 3 at one point, but 2 premises in Llandudno before moving to London. This is the frontage of the current shop in architectural rendition. You can see the plaque commemorating those, and one thing that survives are the tiles on the floor of the entrance as you go into shop. So it's a little trace of that Jewish history. Interesting, if I go back, this Oriental store, Jewish owned store, some of this frontage also exists, just buried under another sign. And part of what we're trying to do is show the hidden history of Britain's high streets here that were formed by national firms like Burton that left their trace in their distinctive Art Deco architecture, but at the same time by local Jewish families who helped shape the distinctive kind of look and shopping experience for generations of people in all across the world really, but in this case Wales and North Wales. And one of the things, Blairman's is another one that still survives in London, is trying to just discover this stuff. People might have this stuff at home. I don't need it. It'd be nice to have it in a museum one day, but photographs would be fantastic to add to what we're doing. And there's a little story about Angela Buxton, who some of you might remember, the tennis champion, who was discovered whilst playing tennis in Llandudno. Anyway, and also another bit of little history that we'll eventually add to is the Kindertransportees who were at Gurrich Castle in northwest Wales, the site of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here this year or last year, and for 2 years. So it's kind of like recapturing and sharing these stories with a wider audience to the benefit of history, of Jewish history, and also just economic tourism. If we can draw people to come here. So can't see enough of Kai, much to his embarrassment. I wonder if he hates looking. I should just keep it up there so Kai has to stare at himself. No one likes that. It's like being on the radio here. I can't see anyone's reactions. Anyway, this is who I've got funding and worked with. So Bangor University. The Jewish Historical Society of England have funding the latest project. And if anyone could point me in the direction of how to apply to the Jewish Memorial Council and others, I'd be grateful. Or the Welsh Government, David, I'd be grateful. So we work with a social enterprise called Menta Fachwen with this chap called Gareth Roberts. it's brilliant because basically they get the money to do their social enterprise projects. They help people with learning difficulties. And I get his expertise in photography and map making. So I don't have to do the hard work. And this is what he's produced. So we've done a map of Bangor, a physical map. If people want them, they can write to me. It's an actual piece of paper. And he does all this. I don't have to do it. And we turn this into an app with a local company, which you can download. Walking Jewish History. I gave it a suitably generic title in the hope that other people can upload their stuff. There's some images. One of my favorites, if you go on here, is a before and after. So you see a picture of the building as it is now, and you swipe your finger across, and it shows you how it was then. And you can sort of move it half and half. It's a bit like that scene in Dynamite Ham, Grammy Ann, and Annie Hall, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, the split screen. And then we did a map of Llandudno, as you can see here, with the fold. Just a little screen grab of the map. And what I'm working with now is to translate the Llandudno map into using this. This is open source. They help you to create a voice map. So it's an audio tour for a small charge, and of Jewish Llandudno. So that's what I'm working on now. And this one isn't audio, though you could add it. The beauty of it is you can add images and graphics, as you can see there. Although the problem is you're looking at your phone as you're walking, which during COVID is fine, but any other time it's probably difficult. This one's entirely audio, so you don't necessarily have to look at it. It tells you what to do. And we're also just working on a physical map of all of Anglesey. So that'll be a sort of driving map, which once complete, I'll probably upload as an audio map. Okay, sorry, I hope that's within time, and I will end there. Happy to take any questions if I've sped through that far too quickly, and put the picture of Kai back up. Just he looks younger in it than he does now. Maybe that's the lockdown stubble. All right.
It was taken a few years ago, but
well, just I ddeud diolch am wrando, diolch am gymryd rhan bore yma. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking part this morning. And dwi'n hapus I gael cwestiynau. I'm happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, David. We've had a lot of questions come through. The first one I'll start off with, because you finished on the app, Nathan, is somebody's asked you how much did it actually cost to create that app?
Right. The Walking Jewish History is to start it off was about £6,000. Then there's the cost each time you want to add a layer and input. Like I could do it myself, but you know, one of the problems with these projects is they rely on individuals or groups of individuals with full-time jobs sometimes. So it would cost then sort of another £1,000, £2,000 to pay for a day's work to get it uploaded to. What I think though would be the best thing, and what all this needs to do, and maybe this is something that Ed, because I know he's in the call, could Ed and Tony and others who are working on this could think about is, I know there's J-Trails as well, is creating one platform. So we don't all have to like raise the money to do our individual ones. Like Jewish Edinburgh's got one. There'll be a talk on that tonight. You know, voice map down my bottom slide. I suggest Googling it. That's free, right? But it's only audio. But there's a charging model. So it's free to upload, but the people who download it pay a fee and you get a cut of that. So to me, that's what I'm going to do in the future, because it's a lot easier than trying to raise funds for these other apps. So that would be my chosen route. You'll just miss the visuals. To produce these physical maps is about £2,000 per map for 1,000 copies. But that includes all the time that this chap Gareth works on. That's basically pays for him to do additional research and then to translate that bilingually, literally, into a bilingual map.
Thank you. I don't know if you wanted to add to that, David, at all, because I know you mentioned that there were plans for a walk-in tour in South Wales.
Sorry, am I unmuted? Yes, we've actually produced it. We had it on. It was supposed to go on a platform called Lockly. I don't know if you know that, Nathan, but they went bust.
It's my platform.
Did they not go bust?
Yeah, I didn't want to be. Yeah, so I don't know if they've gone bust. Probably what happened is they sold their technology to a bigger company.
So we're
it's
just
a startup, and that's what you do. Is like once you reach your.
Well, we're looking for a platform, if that's the right word. It'll be ready to go fairly soon.
I suggest contacting Hannah Holtschneider in Edinburgh, or for the audio one, this voice map one. Anyway.
Thank you. So we've got a question here. It's specifically about the Cathedral Road Synagogue, but I think you could probably talk about other synagogues as well. But there's a question about what's happened to kind of the furnishings and the fittings within these synagogues.
I'm hoping that somebody else who's on Zoom can answer that, because I don't know. Anyone?
Nathan?
What about the fixtures and fittings of Cathedral Road Synagogue?
Oh, no, it doesn't have to be about Cathedral Road. It can just be about synagogues in general.
Well,
sorry, can you repeat the question?
So what happened to the furnishings and fittings in these synagogues? So I don't know if you can talk about Bangor, for instance.
Well, Bangor's still there and in a museum, like I said. Llandudno's still there because it's there. No idea. Absolutely no idea. The problem is they disappear with the people who pass away, and their kids think, what a load of old rubbish. It's frankly how it is, and I have to be mean about this because David had it right. This stuff ends up in the bin. So if any of you have anything, don't leave it to your kids to chuck out, because that's what will happen, right? Let's be brutal about this, and Jewish history will be burnt, or trashed.
We know that a fair number of bits of the Merthyr Synagogue have been preserved in Cyfarthfa Castle, which is a museum, and that itself is being, there's plans for making that into a huge tourist attraction. And interestingly, I saw in the chats there was a question about the Merthyr Synagogue, that beautiful Gothic looking building that I showed you. That is being preserved. A huge amount of money was obtained to preserve it. The Jewish History Association doesn't really have anything formally to do with that. We actually thought that it was going to be built as, well, it originally was planned as a Jewish historical cultural museum, and again as a tourist attraction. And we thought, in fact, that we could wind down our activities and they would basically take over preserving culture and history in South Wales. I don't think that's exactly what's happening. I don't know, but I can say without a doubt that that beautiful building is being preserved.
Thank you, David. We have Lawrence Kahn here, who I think would like to say something about Cathedral Road. Is that right, Lawrence?
Yes, if I may. The windows from Cathedral Road all ended up in the Nantgarw store for the National Museum of Wales. They were hoping that somebody would come along and pay for them to be erected somewhere, but unfortunately nobody did. So either they're still in Nantgarw or they've been disposed of. They were quite large, and some of them were very interesting, but not that pretty. The furniture of Cathedral Road, I'm not sure where it ended up. The furniture of Windsor Place ended up in the car park of Cathedral Road until it was disposed of. Obviously, the Sefer Towers and the other various religious artifacts have ended up with Kincoid Orthodox Synagogue in Kincoid Gardens.
Thank you, Lawrence. And some of the memorial tablets from Cathedral Road are in the synagogue.
No, they are all in the building next to the cemetery in Ely, either erected on the wall or just laying there. Some of them are very interesting, going back to the First World War and various events that happened since then.
And then in Highfield Cemetery as well, there's some older memorial tablets there, aren't there?
There are. The Highfield Cemetery is now, I think, completely full. There's one or two spaces waiting for people's spouses, but apart from that, it's not used at all.
Thank you.
That's not my dog. I've got a cat.
I think it might be Nathan's dog, is it, Nathan? I was just thinking, because I was listening to this, and I just wanted to add possibly some more kind of positive stories with what's been done with some of this furniture, and especially the glass, because Lawrence was talking about glass. A recent example is the stained glass windows in Swansea. They've been transferred over to the Cockfosters and North Southgate Synagogue in North London. So they've got a second lease of life there. And the Pontypridd furnishings are at St. Fagans. So that there's an example for you there. We have a question about, just about kind of family research. So I don't know if we could possibly start with David, and then Nathan can contribute then. Just about how you go about starting to research your family history in Wales, your Jewish family history. Oh, you're on mute, David.
The standard answer is to use genealogy websites, ancestry.com and the like. People do approach the Jewish History Association all the time and say, my Auntie Ida lived in Llanelli. I noticed there was a question posted by Frida Bakerman about what about Llanelli. There were many communities that I didn't mention that weren't on my slide. It was just one of many, and I don't know. But the people who approach us and say, what about Auntie Ida in Llanelli? We just have to refer them to websites, because that's not what we do.
Jewish Gen.
In particular, Jewish Gen. My wife just handed me a note. Do you know Jewish Gen, Nathan or Kai?
Yes, no, I do. Nathan?
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I mean, I'm on Jewish Gen at the moment, trying to trace. It's funny, I spend so much time looking at other people's history, it didn't occur to me to look at my own. The only problem is you hit a kind of brick wall. So I'm back in the 1860s in Lithuania for one of them, and either Minsk or Kiev for the other side, and then you hit the brick wall. So it's what you do after that. It depends how far back you want to go. Kai's probably, one of the other things that Kai did and others do is comb the Jewish Chronicle. That's very useful. You don't have to pay to do this stuff, by the way. Jewish Chronicle you do, but you don't need to use Ancestry.com. Jewish Gen does it for you for free. They just ask for donations. And you can comb other like census data and that sort of thing for your own family history. I just wanted to add something, because I was scrolling through the questions. For the person who wants to develop the app, one of the things I suggest you do is partner with your local university, and get it done on the cheap or for free. I mean, basically, there are students at university that can do this stuff easier than we can. And academics often need to find a way to get their work out there. So, if you can find an academic to work with, it's probably the best way, because as you can see, I work with loads of partners. Often, they didn't have any money. That's not always what it's about. It's about just willingness to work together.
Thank you, Nathan. And there's a question here for David about the heritage preservation toolkit that you mentioned. Are people able to access it?
Sadly, they will be. The problem that we've had with Project 2 is COVID-19. And COVID-19 has severely restricted what we're able to do. And it's delayed the conclusion of the project by quite a bit. It should have been finished by now. Very generously, I was actually quite surprised, because I didn't think we'd be top priority. But the National Library has come through with an extension so that we didn't have to furlough our staff. But the preservation toolkit is something that we're still working on. It will be made available, and another good reason why I should keep note of our website. And as soon as it is available, accessible to all.
Thank you. Oh, we have a question from Lawrence.
Well, no, just an observation. There was the Taff flooded, I think it was 1956, and the historical records of the Orthodox community were in the basement of the Cathedral Road Synagogue, and it was all destroyed. So everything prior to 56 was simply washed away. Great tragedy, because there were the whole records of the start of the various synagogues, both the Schmorsteebles and also Windsor Place Synagogue, which were, and Cathedral Road, obviously, but they were all lost.
Yes, it's unfortunate, but unfortunately there are examples of success stories when it comes to archiving congregational records. Swansea being one example.
Yeah.
You don't have everything there, obviously, but that is probably the largest archival record in Wales linked to a Jewish community, and a lot of that has to do with the work of the archivist there, David Morris. Who's also written about the history of Jews in Wales. Nathan, we have a question here about Mould's Jewish community, or was there a Jewish community in Mould?
You probably remember better than me, Kai. I don't think there was a community. There's probably, quite off the top of my head, quite possibly individuals. Does that accord with your recollections, Kai?
There were certainly families living in Mould, but no formally organised Jewish community, or there certainly wasn't a synagogue there. And this kind of links up to the next question, which came from Patricia Skinner, asking about the dates of the communities. So we mentioned dates of when these communities were established. You know, does that date correspond to when institutional kind of histories first started, or you know, where does that come from?
Varies. For larger communities, what we tend to use is the date of the founding of a cemetery. And certainly the Cardiff date was the date that the Marquis of Bute donated some land for the setting up of a Jewish cemetery in Cardiff. Now, clearly not all communities have Jewish cemeteries, which is one reason why the Merthyr cemetery is so large. But when we've got that, we use that, and when synagogues are formally opened, if that's the right term, consecrated, we would use that. But very often it's just a rough guess of when the community was large enough to call a community.
Nathan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand the question, so no.
We're usually given dates for when Jewish communities are established.
Yeah.
You had a few dates there on one of your slides.
Yeah.
What's the rationale behind that date?
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying. The rationale is that's the date for the foundation of the synagogue. I mean, I would make a distinction between the word community and congregation, right? Lots of people talk about communities, and you know, that's more loose and informal. You know, when I used to work on Scotland, people would be like, well, the Jewish community of Perth, and it meant their family. So fine. A congregation will be a formally established, you know, a synagogue, you know, some or prayer. You know, when you've got a quorum of a minyan of men, and you can suddenly say, right, let's formally, whatever process you go through to formally kind of consecrate a prayer room or synagogue. So that's the dates for those in mind. I mean, experience shows that typically communities arrive probably about 10 to 15 years before families, individuals arrive 10 to 15 years before, and that's how long it takes for enough of them to get enough money to turn what has probably been informal prayer services for a number of years into something formal. In the case of Bangor, you'll see, as I mentioned, people were arriving in the 1840s, but they didn't stay, and they didn't form enough of a nucleus to form a community. And you'll see this across all of Britain's small communities, a similar process, which is why this research is important, because it's not simply about the places we're talking about. The process is very similar across the UK.
Thanks. There was a note in the chat about Welsh newspapers. So obviously, Nathan, you mentioned the Jewish Chronicle archives online. There is a really good website which is run by the National Library of Wales on Welsh newspapers online. And unlike the Jewish Chronicle archive, it's completely free. So I would recommend having a look at that. We have a question about how COVID as well has kind of impacted your work. So I don't know if you could talk a bit about that.
From a research perspective, sorry if David jumped in
No,
there.
please.
From a research perspective, not at all, other than I can't use ancestry.co.uk for free in the public library. That's the other trick, by the way. When your public library opens, go there and use it for free. It's a good reason to do that, actually, which I won't get into here. But from a dissemination perspective, absolutely. We can't do, I should have mentioned, we did physical walking tours and memory sessions. So we walked people around Bangor and Llandudno. We haven't been able to do that. We haven't been able to get and we did exhibitions. I should have mentioned that as well. We held an exhibition in a local shopping centre that was very successful. We got about 1,000 people pass through, and then it went to Cardiff. So we haven't been able to do any of that. But the research, if you're willing to pay, you can just still do that at home. It's the same research, apart from you can't go through directories. Someone mentioned in the chat, they're right. Lots of directories, post office directories, that sort of thing are useful. Business directories for, particularly if you're trying to look for more than just your family, are very useful. So obviously you can't do that now.
We had a lot more face-to-face contacts that became impossible with COVID, and we had a lot more searching of artifacts and the like in museums and so on that became close to us. I went to visit the volunteer that we had based at the Welsh Mining Museum in Trehafod, and she had box loads of interesting looking documents that I was helping her to sort. Our volunteers are all non-Jewish. And of course they closed the doors and we can't get in there. And so our project has been severely constrained by COVID.
Thank you. We have a question here, David. I'm not sure if you're able to answer this, but somebody's asking about the old Jewish cemetery in Swansea and how they may go about possibly accessing that cemetery.
One of the members of our committee, not a trustee, is the expert on deaths and burials. Lawrence, if you can hear me, can you put any flesh on that? I think you'd know about that. Lawrence Kahn is one of our trustees who spoke earlier, commented earlier. If Lawrence is gone,
Lawrence? Lawrence is still with us.
Yeah, I'm still with you. Possibly getting in touch with David Factor, who is, now you want a telephone number, won't you? Or something of that nature. But
we don't need to share contact details today, but
David Factor from Swansea would be the person, and he would know everything about it, really.
Okay.
I can come in on that, having visited that cemetery. My understanding is it's closed, but
yeah,
there are ways and means. That's all I'm going to say. So I have been around that cemetery, but whether I was meant to is another.
Some of us are a little too old to jump the wall.
Yeah, no, I didn't jump a wall. It was. I'm not going to be caught recording saying anything like that. So it might just be worth a visit to have a look around it. Is what I'm saying.
And Michael Tobias has just reminded us that data from many of the cemeteries can be found online via Jewish Gen, which has been mentioned a few times in this talk. So we're actually, time's up, I'm afraid. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you, David, and thank you, Nathan. And just to remind you all that there is another session today at 6 o'clock this evening, where we'll hear from perspectives from Scotland and both Ireland. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr.